The fringed gentian is a rare biennial flower. It lives 2 years. Second year it flowers and then goes to seed, very tiny seeds. It's a beautiful flower, and again, it's rare. We have been maintaining this area for it to grow in for about a quarter of a century. This is part of the Ora Phelps Nature Trail north of Saratoga Springs. The fringed gentian has to have full sun, and it needs a fairly moist soil. Volunteers have been coming, and year after year they've been cutting in, trying to get rid of the pines and poplars and alder that continually try to take up the open space. Where they have succeeded, in the background there, the alder has grown up and it's formed a dense thicket, and that deprives the fringed gentians of the light they need to survive. So over time, the fringed gentian have been chased out of their original area, and they've migrated up to the north to try and get to where there's sun. Unfortunately, right in here the ground gets about 2 feet higher, so this habitat here is not as moist, not as good for them. So we're going to try and reestablish that area there as an open area where the gentian can grow. This is where the problem starts to get interesting. These alder and other shrubby plants have been growing year after year, and volunteers have been cutting them down. What's resulted is there's a fairly large root mass supporting fairly spindly trees and shrubs. So there's not much you can do to pull it up because it's got such a well-established root mass. The roots tend to run 15 to 20 feet in every direction. You can't try to fasten on to the surface part of the plant because that tends to just break off. So to reestablish this area, what we really need to do is take the whole thing out by the roots. Trying to dig around with a mat-axe or chop the roots means the roots are still there and things grow back very quickly from the roots. So we need a means of getting the whole stump and everything up, not just taking off the surface expression. Until my forge really gets going, it puts out a heavy white smoke, and it's heavy enough that some of it just flows around the surface of the hearth, while some of it is heated enough that it goes up the chimney. But it's kind of eerie seeing it just floating around the perimeter of the fire. We're going to want the end of the saddle to slip through the soil fairly easily, so we have to give it a bit of a point. Try a slightly heavier hammer. Okay, now we'll use a smaller hammer to refine it a bit. So now we have to take the rest of this and make a curve on it. We'll do that over the horn. So the point that's going to be hottest is going to be right over the horn, but we'll hit out here to get it to bend. and we'll go for a gradual bend. We'll take this heat and slowly move it along the length of the bar so that we're not wasting heat on it. Okay, so now we'll take this heat and we'll move it down to here. By heating here, this heat will migrate and it will join the heat from the fire to heat this area. Bend this end on the face. Okay, so take a little bit out of it. We'll have to take some out of that, but it's looking pretty good. Now what we need to do is make a hole for the chain to go through on this end. So first we'll taper it down a bit. The next thing we're going to have to do is make a hole in the hot end to put a chain link through so that we'll be able to pull this saddle back up, lift the stump out of the ground. Go right about there. And we'll have to cool it, because we don't want to lose that. Okay, now we've got a hole started. We want a hole that's not a tapered hole, so we'll heat it again and then we'll go through with a punch. This is the punch we'll use. It's round, basically cylindrical. Now hopefully we'll force the plug on out through the hardy hole. Okay. Okay, so there we have a hole where we can put our chain hook in, and we'll make now a slot on the other end to do a similar thing. And periodically we've got to cool the tip so that it doesn't get hot and deform. Now it's come through. So we can see it, and we can work on it from the other side. I've put these two pieces of metal here so that the chisel can go down between them and widen the hole enough to receive the chain hook that we're going to use. Okay, so there's our hole for the hook to go through. So this is our project so far. I had to use a Dremel tool and a grinder a little bit to be able to get the link in there. The other end, we've got this hole here. That's not going to handle a regular hook, so we're going to have to make something out of a piece of sheet metal that will have one end that will just slide through there and have an eye up here that we can put a similar link into. So what I'm going to do now is make the hook part, the flat hook that will use this. To make it, I'm going to use this piece of steel. It's just barely wide enough to go through the slot. We need a hook right here. So what we'll do is we'll heat this up, we'll cut in with the chisel to leave a flat spot right there. We'll hammer this down to get it in, and that way we won't be wasting any metal. It will be contributing to the strength out here. And then this flat part here, we'll have to make a little bit of an indentation there for that to hook onto the slot. This is one of those problems where you don't have enough hands. Ideally, I'd use one hand on the tongs to hold the piece of metal, one hand to hold the hammer, and one hand to hold the chisel. But since I can't do that, that's again where the hardy hole comes in very handy. The hardy hole allows you to mount the chisel so that you're basically doing the cutting from the other side. So I'll hold the hot metal here and hammer down there to use this chisel to cut into the side I need. Okay, so we got a little bit of a notch started there. Once again, we've got the three hands problem. I'd like to be able to hold the piece of metal, hold the hammer, and hold a set hammer to make sure the blow is going directly where I want it to. Since I can't do all three, what I'll do is I'll turn the piece upside down and use the edge of the anvil to come up and squeeze the metal in just inside of where the hook is going to be. So I'll actually be trying to drive it down. The part that I want to stay wide will go down here. The part that I'm trying to move in will be in here. Now we'll cut the notch a little bit deeper. And then we'll drive this down a little bit more, and then finally we'll make an indentation there so that it can actually hook into the slot. this end a little bit more, take it down. Okay, that should be thin enough. Now we'll punch through a pilot hole, and then we'll use the reamer to get the round hole for the link. We turn it over and we can see the little black spot where our center has come through. So now we can take that same spot and start to expand it from this side. We're going to use the Pritchel hole to back up our hook area while we drive this down through there. We're going to go to the 7-pound sledge again to really drive that corner into our piece. Okay, that is just about there. Now we're going to need a slight indentation there, and that's going to be tricky. One problem with using a vise like this is that you're not just touching the cold metal of the vise to the metal you're working, but you're really clamping it on, and that just really facilitates the transfer of heat between the two. You just don't want that. So just got to get that in there, and we'll see if we can keep it from going flying. And there, that looks like we've got it wide enough to hook in. Okay, let's see if we can make this contraption work. Dug out a little bit on each side of the stump mass. Now I've got to try and take this and insert it amongst the roots and see if I can get that to go through. Took about a minute and a half of wiggling to get it through, but I finally got it wiggled around and got it passed through the mass of roots under there. So now we take our flat chain hook and pass it through the slot that's on the far side here. Okay. Now we've got the two yoked up, and we can use this, which I fabricated with a slot in it to hold the chain. So it's got a slot to keep the chain. Now we run the chain over to our cable winch, and now we can begin cranking on the cable winch. Okay, so we'll reset and finish pulling it out, but it looks like that little device is working.